Ladles and jelly spoons, welcome back to Badgerworks. Today, this, actually hang on, wait, this and that. So today we are embarking on another of our little infantry dioramas in an attempt to improve my figure painting, which is going to be made to fit inside this. This is the Master Tools, which is the Trumpeter brand display case. You've seen me use these before, so we're going to use this to put the diorama in, and we're going to use these two sets to provide the figures. And let me show you the ones that I'm planning on using. So out of this set I'm going to use this guy here, the squad leader, and also this guy here who's firing the rifle grenade. And I may either use another one out of here, or I might use this chap here out of this set. I haven't quite decided yet, but I'll probably use him. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting diorama, which for reasons that will be revealed as we go on. But if you're familiar with the enemy of my enemy diorama, you'll have an idea of, of where I'm going with this. But it will be different. There will be a different twist. So yes, but there are going to be some modifications to this guy particularly. But we'll talk about that more when we get to it. But let's get these out of the box and see what we're going to do with them. Okay, let's take these out of the bag and have a look, a little bit closer look at them. So, okay, so the two that I'm going to use from here, I might actually use 3 of them, I'm not sure yet. So we're going to have this guy here. This is the squad leader figure, so we'll be using him. Now this one is going to have some fairly extensive modifications done to it, which will become apparent at a later date. So I might actually do a separate video on this chap. So that's that. The other chap that we're going to use is this one here, which is that guy there lying down. Now obviously he's lying down firing a rifle grenade, but in this particular diorama he will just have a normal rifle, again for reasons that will become apparent. And I'm thinking I might use one of these two as well, because in the other set we've got this guy here. I don't know whether to use him or these ones, or indeed all of them. I'll have to have a little think about that. But first of all, let's I want to get this guy put together because he's definitely going to be in it. So we'll do him first. Right, so that's that one. And we need this guy here. That. It's interesting that they've moulded his hand as a separate piece. That one, and his head. The helmets and everything are all on this other frame, so we can just do those as necessary. Right, this guy here, I think I'm going to use this one. Let's put that actually to one side for a minute. That one. The reason for my choices of which figures to use will become apparent as things go on. Now we've got 2 of these backpacks. one of those will be going with the squad leader. I know he shouldn't have a backpack, but again, the reason for that will become apparent. Right, okay, let's get these cleaned up and start putting them together. So one of the things I've just been doing on this, which I don't actually normally do, it's the first time I've tried it, is actually rescribing these figures. Hopefully you can see that all right. But what I've done is, it's a technique I read about on Facebook and I thought I'd try it, and it actually works quite well. You basically take the point of your knife, and where you've got a transition like here where his jacket meets his trousers, on a lot of models that's quite not very well defined. So what I've done is, just by taking the point of the knife, is you just scrape away at it and kind of more define that joint. So it's like, for example, if you compare on his boots here, so this one I've done and this one I haven't. I don't know whether you can see that, but you look at how much more detailed that looks. So basically what you do, I'll show you on these straps because it seems to be a bit easy to see. So what you do is you just take the point of your knife and just scrape along the edge with the point. And what it does is it kind of undercuts that line and makes it easier and more defined, you see, so you can see it better. So again, if I do this one, it just makes the whole thing a little bit easier to see and a bit more defined, you see. Now another thing that apparently is a good idea to do, which I think I can see how it works, is doing underneath like these lapels and stuff. And I've seen the guy whose post I saw who was demonstrating this, whose name unfortunately escapes me, what he was doing was he was going right underneath, so you just literally had the lapel left, and it looked amazing, but I don't think I've quite got the patience or the skill for that. So we'll start small. But again, it's like the edges here, we'll just go down here just to sort of make that transition a bit sharper. You see, and again, it's not too bad on these ones actually, but like round this shirt, round his collar, like that, you see, so that there's not, because if you look there you see that it almost blurs into one, whereas doing this, it just helps define them a bit better and separate them a bit more. So it's quite tricky. I think it's going to take some practice, but I think with practice it will actually be quite a good effect. So I hope you can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm trying to keep it in front of the camera, but it's quite difficult. Obviously this is slightly more awkward because it's a semicircle, so I don't think that's too bad. And then what you can do once you're done is, if you get your thin cement and just paint some on, it will get rid of any little rough bits and kind of tidy it up. So I'll do the rest of him and we'll see what he looks like. Right, so there he is. I haven't glued his rifle in his hand yet, obviously I'll do that after it's all painted up, but I think we're pretty much in the right spot with him. let's move on to the other ones. Right, so we're going to start. I'm going to start by painting some faces, and I'm going to start with a layer of this Bugman's Glow Citadel base. I'm going to use pretty much all Citadel paints for these flesh tones because I want to see how well they work. Right, so that's the Bugman's Glow. Now we're going to layer over that with some Cadian flesh tone. Right, that's that. Now we're going to start trying to do some fine highlighting. And for that we're going to use this Kislev flesh. So I'm doing like his cheekbones and his chin and basically any highlighted raised parts of his face. Okay, right, so what I'm going to do now is give it a little wash of this Reichland flesh shade, and then I'm going to go back and highlight it again. I'm just going around his nose and his mouth a bit more with the Cadian flesh tone because it kind of looks like he's got a mask on. There's a bit too much shading around his mouth, so I'm just going to go back in and try and lighten that up a little bit. Right, that looks a bit better. Right, and I'm going to highlight it again. Right, so this is some highly watered down Kislev flesh. And this is mainly just for his nose and his cheeks and his chin. There we go. I think that looks rather good. Quite pleased with that. Yeah, right, let's do the rest of them. Right, so let's make a start painting these figures. I'm only going to do one of them, or I'm going to film one of them, because all three will be painted in exactly the same fashion. But I'm going to start off with his jacket, which will get a coat of XF60 dark yellow. And yes, your eyes are not deceiving you, this is a huge jar of Tamiya. This is one of the old jars, which as you can see is much bigger than the ones you get now, and used to cost the same amount. So there you go. Anyway, yes, let's get a start on this jacket. And this is where you can see, hopefully, where those lines I scribed earlier makes it a lot easier to get up to all the various little details. So it's like I can get around here without worrying about going over his belt and things like that. I can get right up to the edge of it because it has a much more clearly defined edge, basically. It's very tricky doing this in front of the camera because the camera always seems to end up being exactly where the brush wants to be, but we shall do our best. Oh, it's so annoying when you can see bits but you can't get a brush in there to actually paint them. It's one of those things that this would be much easier to do before you put the various bits together, but the trouble is if you do that you then end up with a seam that you can't get to, or you can't cover up because you've painted it. But we'll manage. But yes, I must say this rescribing the lines on the figures, it certainly makes them a lot easier to paint, to see like where one bit finishes and the next bit starts, because before it was almost impossible, but now I can see it quite well. Right, this is going to be tricky. There we go. Right, so that's the first coat on his jacket done. I'm going to let that dry. I might need to do another one. Now what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to do his gaiters on his boots as well, the same colour. And the reason I'm doing the gaiters now before I do his boots is, as I've mentioned before, I always think it's a good idea to do light colours first and then dark colours over the top, because you get much better coverage going from a light colour to a dark colour than you do the other way around. So this way, if I get any over paint on his boots, I can cover it up quite easily with the brown. Oh. I just keep constantly tripping over the camera with the brush handle. I might even cut a few inches off of this brush to make this a bit easier. Right. Okay. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over the buckle on his belt, on his jacket, and then I'll go back later and touch it up with some silver or whatever. But just for now I want it to blend in with the rest. Right, so that's our first coat on. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do his belt and bits and pieces as well. There's a couple of other pouches that need to be done the same colour as this, so I'll do these and then we'll move on to the next colour. Right, so for the next step, the belts and buckles and bits and pieces, backpacks and everything, we're going to use this XF59 Desert Yellow. There we go. I'll do all the other bits as well. Right, next for his trousers we're going to use our XF52 Flat Earth. Stop laughing at the back. Now obviously with this figure, because he's got his hole in the back of his leg, once we've got everything done and dusted, we'll need to come back and fill that hole, but that actually won't be too difficult a job. And you might say, well, why don't I just fill the hole now? Well, the reason being is because I can actually see in that hole to thread the wires through. So, and I don't really want to have all the wires hanging off of him while I'm trying to paint him. I've just swapped to a slightly bigger brush to do the field of his trousers, because quite frankly it's a lot easier than trying to do it with that little pointed brush. Normally I do everything with the pointed brush, but in this particular instance, because it's such a big field to fill in, it's easier to do it this way. That's why I went round the outside, round the edges first with the thin brush, because then I can just go back and fill in the field of it with the bigger brush. That'll do for that. Right, now we're going to do his shirt and some other little details with this XF51 khaki drab. Right, there's that. Right, now a bit of flat brown XF10 for his boots. Right, there we go. Right, now on to XF62 olive drab for the helmets and various handles and cases and scabbards and bits and pieces like that. Right, now I'm going to put his put the backpacks together, and for this I'm actually not going to use the Tamiya. I'm going to use this Revel Contactor Professional because it's a bit thicker, so you can basically put a blob on like that, and then put the bits where they need to go. So rather than putting the pieces together and then putting the glue on, we put the glue on and then put the pieces together. So now the this is apparently a canned meat pouch, which I think is the most oddly and yet gloriously specific bit of kit ever. Oh, except this fell off. There's glues in the right place. Right, let's try that again. Oh, come on. Alright, there we go. I'm doing this before I'm doing the weathering because I wanted these pieces all together so I can weather them all in one as one unit. Right, now we're going to do some highlighting with this XF78 wooden deck tan. Right, now this is going to look weird at first and you're going to think he's ruined this, but trust me, there is method in my madness. So what I've done is I've watered down the deck tan fairly heavily, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to paint basically the highlights. And as I say, you're going to look at this and think he's gone nuts, but trust me, it will all come good in the end. So what I'm doing is, as I said, I'm just painting on this deck tan in a very thin coat, pretty much anywhere where the light would naturally strike, so edges and things like that. And again, like the seams on it, or the wrinkles on his coat and all the rest of it. And just paint it on. You have to be fairly careful with this. And as I say, the paint is very heavily thinned. Like that. We'll do this arm as well. And you might be looking at this and thinking it's too heavy, it looks weird. And yes, at the moment it does look weird, but trust me, it will all become good in the end. Right, now we're going to do his trousers as well. So you can see I keep turning it like that, and basically what I'm doing, you probably can't see it very well on the camera, but I'm looking for where the light is catching. And then I'm kind of exaggerating that with the paint. So I know it looks weird, but it will work in the end. And what seems even weirder is I'm going to do his boots as well. But with his boots, it's almost like a dry brush, just to pick up the highlights. There we go. Right, now we'll set this aside to dry, and then I'll show you how we're going to fix this, if you like. Right, now before we do the next step, I'm going to put his head on, and you'll see why in a minute. So these heads are sometimes a bit tricky to fit. Oh, I just dropped it on the floor. Right, found it. That was lucky. We've all done it. Don't pretend you haven't. Right, so he needs to have his head on like that-ish. Let's take that out for a second because it'll make him a bit easier to manoeuvre. They're kind of weird when you first put the heads in because they always look like the heads don't fit the bodies properly, like they're too small. This is the Revel contactor. It's just because it's a bit thicker. It tends to grip a bit more. Because the extra thin is very good, but it's difficult to put it on because it dries so fast. It tends to dry before you can get the piece in place. Whereas the contactor is designed more to apply the glue, then put the pieces together. If that makes sense. Right, see, yeah, you see what I mean? His head looks tiny, but it's because it hasn't got the helmet on. Once we've got the helmet on, it will look a lot better. Right. So now let's put a bit on the top of his head. Like that. And put his helmet on. And try not to drop this on the floor, because the carpet monster might not be so forgiving next time. Oh, I'll put that on backwards. Let's put that on the right way around. Might help. There we go. Right. There we go. Now it looks a bit better, doesn't it? Right, so I'm going to leave this to dry for a few minutes, and then I'll show you how we're going to tie all of this together. Right, now we're going to use this to tie it all together. That's right, this is our Reichland Flesh Shade. This is, I actually really like this stuff. I bought this a little while ago. I've used it a few times and I really like it. It's so useful for all kinds of different things. And this is another thing. So let me show you how I'm going to use it here. Get some on the brush and put it on, and you'll see immediately the transformation. You need to put it on fairly heavy. Basically use it like a wash rather than as a filter, but it's having the effect of a filter. And what that's doing is it's bringing everything together and unifying all the colours. Now the reason I waited to do this until I put his head on is because I want to get some in there around his neck to shade the joint between his neck and his body. You see, like that. But you see the way it's picking up all of the recessed parts, all of the shaded parts. But what it's also doing is where we've highlighted it, it's pulling all those highlights together and making them far less obvious. So they're still there and they're still working and they're still doing everything they need to do, but they don't look as obvious. So all you people that were sitting at home going, he's ruined that, now you realise that there was indeed method in my madness. And we're going to go over the whole thing of this except for his head, because obviously his head, he's already had it when we painted his face, so it doesn't need any more on there. But we will go over the whole of the rest of his body, because this is all like earth tones, it's all browns. We can use this one filter to do his whole body, which is useful. The only thing I'll say is you've got to be a little bit careful with this, because you want to make sure you don't miss any, because A, you'll miss out on any shading, but also because it's darkening the underlying colours, if you miss any, then you'll have a light spot that doesn't match the rest of it. Now obviously, as I'm sure you're probably all thinking, what about that big hole in his leg? Well, I'm going to have to come back and touch this up a little bit afterwards. But you know, that's just the way it is. But like I said, I don't really want to close up that hole until I've got all the wires run, the lights fitted, and made sure everything is working. Right, and there we go, you see. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make sure I've covered everything I need to cover, because that's not always easy when it's in front of the camera. Then I'm going to hit this with a hairdryer very carefully, and the trick is when you're hair drying it is to keep rotating it, because obviously this stuff is very thin and the air from the hairdryer will push it around. So what you want to do is get it dried and get it kind of fixed in place. So I'll go away and do that, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Right, and there he is. He's obviously very glossy at the moment because the flesh shade dries to a fairly glossy finish when you put it on heavily like this. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly, I'm going to hit this with some matte varnish to give you a better idea of what it will look like. I mean, normally the matte varnish would be the last step, but I can always give it a coat now and it won't affect it. So let me go and do that quickly, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Right, so there he is with a quick flick over of a matte varnish, and hopefully now you can see what I was talking about. In fact, actually that hole in his leg is even a lot less noticeable now. But anyway, but you can see how it's kind of pulled all of the highlighting and everything together, and it's now much less obvious and a lot more of a subtle effect. So yeah, I'm very pleased with how that's come out. So right, let's move on. Right, so the figures are done now. Here's the first one. This is our chap lying down. I decided to give him the BAR instead of a rifle in the end because I thought it just looked a bit wary. So he's had a few bits added. So he's got a grenade. Let me get a pointer, sorry. He's got a grenade, he's got the BAR. He has the backpack. I put the bayonet on the side of his pack because basically when he's laying down like that it wouldn't fit on his belt, and also this thing is huge. It's more like a machete than a bayonet. But anyway, that's beside the point. Now he does need a coat of like a proper coat of matte varnish, but we'll do that nearer the end when we do everything else. So that's that one. This is our second chap who he's just kind of standing there in a slightly odd pose. So he's got the M1 Garand, and he's got a couple of grenades. He's got water bottle, bayonet and entrenching tool. So that's him. So he's pretty much done basically. Again, he needs varnish, but that's all. And last but not least, we obviously have our squad leader. Now, he's not finished, as you can see. He doesn't have any belt equipment. He doesn't have his gun. And the reason for that is because the next thing I want to do is move on to making the torch to go in his hand. And the reason I don't want to stick anything on is, you know, because you know as well as I do, if you were trying to work on this and all that stuff was stuck on, all you'd be doing all the time is knocking it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the torch for his hand, and once that's done and it's wired and everything, then we can put all the rest of the bits on him, put his backpack on and all the rest of it. So that stuff's all ready to go, it's just not on him yet. The next thing we need to do is make a torch for him to hold in his hand. Now, I have made a prototype because I wanted to make sure that what I wanted to do would actually work, and it does. So what I'm going to do now is there are a few things I learnt making that prototype, and I'm going to make another one now with the lessons learned from the first one. So, first things first, we need some bits. Right, so the first thing we need is an LED, which is here. These, I think I mentioned before, I can't remember if I did or not actually, but these are designed, these come on big rolls of this, and they're designed to be soldered by an industrial process, by a robot, not by an idiot. But that's why these holes are along the side of this, and that's basically so our sprocket can sort of push it into the machine. But anyway, that's not really an issue right now. So what we'll do is we'll get one of these out, like that, and we'll put those to one side. I might have to get some more of those soon. Now, there's a few things I want to point out with these LEDs. Oh, firstly, they ping around something crazy. They are very, very easy to lose. I've lost so many of these things. But anyway, so there's a couple of things to bear in mind. Firstly, you need to know which side is the positive and the negative. If you're looking at it from the top, on this particular one, you'll see on the end there's a little green tab or a little green blob of ink. That's the negative side. Okay. If you look on the back of it, you can see there's like a green T. Now the cross of the T, if you like, the top of the T, that goes to the positive side. So remember that. So we need that. We need some wire, which I've got. Where's my wire gone? We need some wire, and obviously to solder it all up. We need solder and soldering paste, which I'll get it in a minute. And what we're going to do is we're going to solder the LED onto the wires. Then we're going to make the torch, fit the LED into the torch, and then run the wires through his body. So the first thing I need to do is solder the LED to the wires. Right, so I've got the LED in the clamp here, and one of the things that I want to do is change how I actually soldered the wires on, because before I just soldered them like straight across the joint like that, and that made it actually slightly awkward getting it like into his arm and things like that. So what I'm doing this time is I've basically taken the wire, stripped the very end of it and just bent it over, and that's so that I can put it on like that, you see. And it's to keep the wires behind the LED, because one of the things I found on the prototype was when they came out the side, it was difficult to get the LED to sit straight inside the torch. So let's get a brush and some soldering paste. Oh, and once again, this is very tricky to do behind the camera, but we'll manage. Like that. Right, that's on. Now, turn this up the other way. And do the same thing again. That's it. That's got it. Right, so I've got here a 3.7 volt lithium polymer battery with a JST type connector on it, and I'm going to connect the LED to that and make sure that it works. Now, I don't know if I've shown you these before. If you don't have any of these, if you're doing this kind of work, these are brilliant. They're basically terminal blocks, but they're manually operated ones. They're just spring loaded, and so all you do is you just take your wire, and for this we want the negative, just push down, put the wire in and let go of it, and it grips it. So you don't need a screwdriver or anything. So for sort of quick temporary jobs like this, it's absolutely perfect. Right, now, oh, there we go. Right, so that works, so that's good. So now we can continue, because the last thing we want to do is go through all of this and then find out the LED doesn't work. So always test it first. So that's that. So let's get rid of that for a minute. Right, so we can put this to one side and turn off the soldering iron, because we don't need that anymore. Now, to make the actual light, we're going to use this. This is styrene tube from Evergreen. This is 5mm, I believe. So what we're going to do is we're going to make like a carriage lantern. So we need to make a hole in this to make the front. Hopefully this will all become apparent as I'm going along. So the first thing I want to do, I need to make a hole right through, basically to get the wires out the back and to get the LED in the front. So what I'm going to do is just make a little notch here, like a pilot hole. And I think what I'll do is I'll do it on this bit of scrap MDF, because I think it might be a bit easy for you to see what I'm doing without the white background. So there's our little divot. So now we get pin vise. This is the same one we used before to drill the hole in the figure. Right, so we drill through one side like that, and then straight through and out the other side. Right, so there's our holes. Right, that's a hole all the way through. Let's just clean that up a little bit. Right, okay, now what we need to do is get a 4mm drill, and what we're going to do is enlarge one of the holes. And you have to be careful with this, because you don't want to tear the thing to pieces, because this drill is almost the same diameter as the as the tube itself, so you have to be very careful. Right, there we go. So let's clean that hole up. So we need to make sure this hole is nice and clean, because we need to be able to get the LED through it. So that's basically the body of our lamp. Now we get our trusty little JLC razor saw, which still desperately needs a new blade in it, and one day I will get around to putting one in, but not today. and we need to cut that off. Like this. There we go. So that's the body of our torch. So now what we want to do is take this piece of pipe, like the full piece, and get a round file of a suitable dimension. And basically what I want to do is kind of put a relief cut in the end of this, so that it will fit around the curve of the body. Like that. Doesn't have to be a huge hole, just basically put a bit of a curve in it like that. And again, we'll clean this up. And we need this to be clean because again the LED has to go through this, so we want to make sure there's no nasty sticky out bits. Now that should fit. And this is very difficult for me to actually show you what I'm doing, but that will fit over the other hole like that, you see. Oh, focus, there we go, like that. Now we need to cut this off straight, and it only needs to be like 1 millimeter or 2 long, not very long at all. But this will create like the lens or the hood of the lamp. Okay, so now what we need to do is glue this onto this. So this is where your extra thin quick setting glue really earns its money. Don't worry if things move about too much, because you've got a few seconds to get it positioned. But what you want to do is make sure that the hole inside is lined up, because again we have to get the LED in there, and the last thing we want is for the holes not to be lined up and the LED won't fit. So bit of glue, there we go. Now we need to make the top and the bottom, and to do that we're just going to use a piece of plastic card. This is why I never throw any of this stuff away. Whenever you've got little scraps of it, just keep them because they're always useful. So we'll just cut a piece of this off, just a small piece, like that. And then we'll cut that in half, like that. Now we put our light on like that, a bit more glue, like that. So this is very fiddly. And now just leave that to set up for a minute. While that's just drying, what we're going to do is we're going to make the lens. So the lens I am making out of this. This is a piece of clear sprue, obviously. This is actually from the HE162 I made the other day. Now this, the diameter of this is, I measured it earlier, it's 4¼ millimeters, and the internal diameter of that tube is 4 millimeters. So this won't quite fit. So what we do is we just get a little bit of sandpaper like this and just rough it down a little bit, just to take a little touch off, so that it will fit. And then I'm going to put a little touch of glue on the end of it. And that's where I cut it before. And that's basically because I want it clear. So by putting that glue on it, it basically cleans up the end and gets rid of the cut marks from the previous cut, because as I say, I made one of these before. So now we again turn to our razor saw, and we just want to cut the smallest amount of the end, about 1 millimetre. I mean, if it's any more than that, it doesn't really matter, but basically we just want a very thin piece to act as a lens. So there we go. And there we go. So that's our lens. Now what you can do at this point is paint it. So what I'm going to do is I've got here some X24 clear yellow, and I'm just going to put a little drop of that on the end of this lens, or on the what will become the inside of the lens. Oh, that's obviously going to stick to the brush, because why wouldn't it? So let's just get hold of that in the tweezers. There we go. You don't need a massive amount. And now we'll leave that to dry as well. So, right, these are both dry now. Let's put that to one side. Now coming back to this, what we need to do is trim up this top and bottom. So the easiest way to do that is get a little pair of scissors and just snip it off like that, all the way around. Like that, and just trim it all the way off. Like that. Do the same on the other side. Right, and then we'll get a little bit of sandpaper again, and we'll just go around and clean up these edges. Doesn't have to be perfect, just get rid of any obvious rough spots. Okay, so now we need to clean this out and put the light inside. So what I'm doing is I'm just trimming away any rough bits on the inside here, just to make sure that there's nothing to stop the bulb going in. Like that. Right, so now we take our lamp and we put the wires through. There's one. There's two. And then pull them through like that. And this is where it gets slightly tricky, because what we need to do is bend that slightly so that it will go in like that. And then the really tricky bit is getting the LED to sit flat again. There we go. Okay, now there's our LED in there. Let's just test it again, make sure it still works. Right, so that's the LED in. Now the next thing we need to do is, as you can see, this thing is lit up like a Christmas tree. It's no good like that. So what we need to do is paint it. So what I'm going to do is just give it a coat or two, or however many it needs, of this Chaos Black Citadel. Just daub it on with a brush, and then once that's dry, basically put layers on until there's no light showing through anymore. And then once that's dry, then I'll give it a coat of a suitable green to make it look slightly more army. So let's get a brush and give it a paint. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it lit up while we paint it, because then that way it's easier to see when it's not lit up anymore. I mean, I suppose you could paint this before you put the insides in it, but quite frankly, it's you'd probably just knock the paint off putting the wires in. So oh, it is quite difficult when it keeps shining in your eyes. And at least the wires give you something to hold it by. So although it is quite tricky, as you can see, it moves around a lot, but there we go. So we'll let this first coat dry. It's basically just a scratch coat, and then once that's dry, the paint will stick to the next layer of paint will stick to it better. Right, this is the next layer going on, and as you can see, there's virtually no light coming through it now. In fact, I think that's pretty much got it. Right, so let's put this to one side and let it dry, and then we'll put a coat of green over the top. While that's drying, I'm going to make a little handle for the top, and the easiest way to do that is this is a 4mm drill. This is a bit of wire, and I'll just bend that round there like that. And then cut it to length. Snip a bit off there. And there. Like that. Put some glue on the handle. And stick it in place. Try and get it somewhere near the middle and somewhere near straight, because at the moment that is neither. There we go. And then once that super glue's dried, we'll just paint the whole thing green. Right, now we get our lens back, which is now nice and dry, and we basically, so you want it paint side up, so the paint's going inside, and put that over like that and push it down. Like that, and try not to scrape all the paint off with your thumbnail. Never mind, we'll touch that up again in a minute. There we go. And that basically gives us a little yellow tinge to the light, so it's not so bright. And also now we'll just give it another quick go over with the glue, and that will do two things for us. Firstly, it will make sure that that stays in place, but it'll also make it go transparent to let more light through. And I'll just touch up the paint I knocked off. But anyway, there we go. Right, one last thing to deal with. There's a hole in the back, obviously, where the wires come out, and as you can see, the light is bleeding out through that, and I want to try and stop that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little bit of sponge And I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I'm going to try and stuff this sponge into that hole to try and block the light a bit. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we'll try it. Oh. Oh no, I think we're getting there. Now what we've got to be careful of is not to push it all the way through. Right. Oh, that's much better. Look at that. Okay, now we need to put this through his body. That's going to be fun. Okay, now for the fun bit. Let's take that out because we're going to need that hole in a minute. So the first bit should be easy. Putting it through his arm. Like that. So, yes, that's the easy bit. Now, we've got to go down his leg. Now, I did this before, but it was tricky. Oh, not out through his leg. Right, just talk amongst yourselves for a minute. And of course, when I did it before, I only put one wire through, so right, I need a light. Right, well, that's throwing the white balance on the camera all to hell, but I need the light, unfortunately. Right, there's the hole, I can see it. That's it, that's one. Let's pull that through a bit. Okay, now for the fun bit, we've got to get the other one in. But this one, hopefully, will be a bit easier to see because it's red. Right, I think we've got it. Oh, it's come through. Yes, got it. Success. And that actually didn't take nearly as long as I thought it was going to. Right, now, what I did actually was I put this down and I just, where the holes intersected, I just opened it up a touch more and that was enough. It kind of almost acted like a funnel and just let it go in. So that was very useful. So now let's pull these through here all the way through like so, up to his hand like that, and then pull them down through his leg like that. Right, and there we go. So now, sanity check. Ah, there we go. Success. Right, well, after much wailing and gnashing of teeth, that's that bit done. So what I've got to do now is touch up the paint again because I've knocked another bit off. I need to glue that in his hand, but I might wait until he's actually on the diorama for that in case I need to like move it around, angle it around a bit. But then we can put all his belt kit and everything on, so we'll do that next. Right, so I've got his backpack on, but I've actually done something a little bit crafty here because I've actually, you can actually just see a little bit there, I've stuck his backpack on with some blue tack. And so that way, if I ever need to get in here to do anything, I can still take this off and access the hole in his back. Right, what do I want next is gun. Okay, now I've got to remember how this goes in, because you have to kind of threadle it through his... There we go, that's it. Like that. We'll put drop glue there. And here is the finished article, for now anyway. Our three intrepid American GIs who are going to be in for a bit of the shock of their lives, truth be told, but that will all become apparent in a future video. So these guys are now more or less ready to go on the diorama, and you'll see that in a future video. But yeah, I'm quite pleased with how these have come out. I mean, as I've said before, figure painting is not my strong point, but the way we get better at things is to practice, and practice has happened. And yeah, I think it's we're definitely making improvements. So we shall continue with our efforts in the future. But in the meantime, look forward to the next part of this video, which will be upcoming, which will be the actual diorama build itself. And in the meantime, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.